year. I've actually contributed to this collection myself. Kevin Hefferon is our current geologist, and it's an amazing resource for students learning geology or really learning any field of science. The fact that you can actually have these hands-on experiences, you can look at the specimens, you can pick them up and tell their weight, you can feel them and feel if they're rough or smooth. I mean, all of those are what are called field markers that you just don't get from a slide or an image. This is part of our paleontology collection. This is actually the fan palm fossil that was in that earlier image. And it's a little hard to see, but in the upper left, that's actually a fish skeleton swimming across that fan fossil. We also have 2 fossil turtles in this image. We actually have about half a dozen fossil turtles in the collection. Again, somewhere between 48 and 56 million years old. And the one on the upper right, we're actually in the process of writing up. This actually may be a new turtle species. Again, it's been kicking around in our collection for over 30 years. And we've just realized, 1, that it's in fantastic condition, and 2, when we've waded through all of the published reports, we know where this fossil came from, and we can't find another one that's identical to it. So this may be what's called a holotype or a new species. Here are a few more images from the paleontology collection. We have lots of what are known as Green River fish. Green River Formation is a massive formation in the west. It covers parts of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and where else, Pat? Those 3 states. This was a huge inland sea 50-some million years ago, and it has fabulous plant, insect, and fish fossils. And just a few years ago, Wyoming made a big deal about their formation because they found what they call Wyoming's first horse. They found a horse about this big in the fossil layers along the lake. Just a handful of other fossils. On the upper right, you'll see a number of insect fossils. Currently, we take students out west, not every summer, but almost every summer if we can, and we collect plant and insect fossils from the Green River Formation. And these are some of the examples. It just gives you some idea of the incredible preservation that you see in these kind of fossils. Also, just the other day in the upper left, we happened to open up a drawer and find 50-million-year-old fossil turtle poop. Now, this doesn't excite most people, but it excited me a little bit. We also have what many of you are probably familiar with, which is known as the Menominee clan story. So this is a collection of carvings done by James Frechette, Jr. Jim Frechette was an extremely knowledgeable traditional Menominee elder. He was also a fabulous craftsperson, carver and painter. And Jim created this exhibit with Ed Marks, but Jim carved each one of these figures, which represent the 32 traditional clans in the Menominee religion. And this was one of the first times anywhere in North America that an indigenous person had taken original origin stories that had been passed down for thousands of years, took those stories and created a 3D image of all the details for each one of those clan figures. So each one of these animals actually represents a specific clan. So we have the white-tailed deer in the upper right, and he's actually pounding rice. He's pounding wild rice. The name Menominee was a name given to those people. Menom is the indigenous word for wild rice. Menominee means people of the wild rice. Like many tribes all across North America, that's what their neighbors called them. Those guys over there eat wild rice. We're going to call them the people of the wild rice. Their name for themselves is actually about this long, and I can't pronounce it, but basically it means the ancient movers with the seasons. And their name for Wisconsin was the place that has everything you need to live well. In the lower left, you'll actually see that's a mud turtle clan figure. And what he's doing is he's boiling maple sap, so this is appropriate for this time of year. He's boiling maple sap to make maple sugar. And in the slide above that, you'll see, it's a little difficult to see, but there's actually a guy tapping a maple tree. So all the different clans of the Menominee, they all had individual jobs and responsibilities in the tribe. And so this is a display that I often give talks to school kids about, although for the Menominee, this is not really a kid-appropriate exhibit. This is an extremely complex exhibit that talks about their cosmology and their origin and their religion. But they have allowed me to basically use it to help kids understand sort of the worldview and the environmentalism that Native Americans had in this part of the state. In the lower right, there's actually, if you come to the museum and ever look at this exhibit, there's this little wooden box, and occasionally somebody will knock on my office door and come in and say, what's the deal with the box sitting in there? Because there's no little informational tag that talks about it. In fact, there's very little information associated with this display at all, and that's exactly how the Menominee want it. Their view is that if you want to know more about this particular story or what these mean, you can go look at a website that we have dedicated to this, or you can actually go to the Menominee tribe themselves and ask them. But this little box that sits in the front of the display, this is called a feather box. And what this is this is a traditional contract, a binding contract. And what's inside that box is an eagle feather and some little tiny curled pieces of birch bark with some symbols on it. Basically, this is a legal agreement between the Menominee tribe and the state of Wisconsin. And what it says is that this display and these figures are in perpetuity part of the state of Wisconsin, and the Menominee tribe would like them to reside exactly where they are. Partially it's because the university happens to be there right at the moment, but it's also partially because right where campus sits is on top of Sandhill, Crane, and Wolf traditional clan territory. Not many clan territories are actually up in Menominee County in what is now the reservation. The Menominee use the entire state and parts of Iowa, Illinois, Michigan. So UWSP's,
Crane and the Wolf?
Yep, Sandhill, Crane, and the Wolf. So the Sandhill, Crane territory actually extends from the sloughs north of town here over towards campus. So again, this is a legal agreement between the Menominee tribe and the people of the state of Wisconsin. Another amazing specimen that we happen to have in the collections is this male passenger pigeon. So last year was the centennial, 100 years since Martha, the last passenger pigeon, passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo. And we have what may be one of the last, if not the last, passenger pigeon killed in Wisconsin. So this passenger pigeon was collected along the Rock River in 1900, which is 1 year later than the last passenger pigeon supposedly killed in Wisconsin, which was in 1889. So we may, I mean, it's a dubious honor, but we may have one of the last passenger pigeons killed in the state. And that mount has been used in a brand new exhibit we have on the passenger pigeon, which you see in the lower right. Local wildlife artist Mary Bratz painted the background for us. And those of you who are familiar with Rocha Cree, or that area south of Wisconsin Rapids, that view is from the top of Rocha Cree looking south towards Friendship Mound. That's the site of the largest passenger pigeon nesting ever recorded in North America. If I have the numbers right, it was right about 80 million nests were located in that area. So now we finally get to sort of the title of my talk. What kind of weird stuff did we find in the vault? Well, we found lots of stuff. We found this really intriguing I'm blanking on the possum, sorry. We found this really intriguing possum mount. So it's an adult mother possum with all these little tiny babies, except that this was mounted about 70 or 80 years ago. So the skin is starting to shrink on all of the mounts, which means every one of the babies is grimacing. It's a little hard to see from here. But we also found things like giant horseshoe crabs, leopard skulls, and lion skulls from Africa, handmade saddlebags with deer feet sewn on them, and I actually brought one along tonight for you to look at. And an amazing collection of mammal skulls. When we pulled these out, I lined them all up on my desk there in the museum. And this was really a fortuitous find, because since I came on as director, 3 times state auditors have come to me and said, okay, each year we randomly pull like 18 to 20 items that we want you to identify that you have. And they drive up in blacked out Suburbans. State auditors are really strict. And they said, we're looking for this mammal skull collection that was donated to you in the mid-60s. And I'd say, not only do I have no paperwork on it, I've never seen it until last year when we opened up the freezer, and there it was. So we found everything from really spectacular mineral specimens and ceramics to things that are totally bizarre, like these mudstone concretions that look like Mr. Potato Head. So these were actually recovered by a guy in 1943, hydraulic mining in central Alaska. He was gold mining, and he brought us some other amazing items, pieces of a Pleistocene horse, pieces of mammoth that he literally blasted out of a valley in central Alaska. And again, that piece of ceramic, the pot on the lower left, I'll talk about a little more in just a minute. We also had this amazing set of, obviously in the middle, everybody's going to recognize those as deer antlers, right? But that's a full set, an adult set of deer antlers that are still in velvet, which is pretty rare. And I'm guessing based on the condition of the mount, I saved the antlers and pitched the mount. It was in very, very rough shape. But I'd say those were collected sometime in the 1940s. We also had these items. So in the center part of the picture there, when we opened up the freezer, there was this huge cardboard box, and written all over the side of the box was coral, or coral from the Pacific. And I opened up the box and I thought, well, this is cool. Maybe, during World War II, or maybe after that, somebody went down into the Pacific and collected all this coral. And I opened it up and I realized instantly, this is not coral. What this is, these are pieces from the interior of the skull of a mammoth. So this is called cancellous bone. I have no information on it, no idea where it came from, no idea who dug it up, no idea how it got to Stevens Point, but I can tell you it's not coral. In the upper right, this is actually an interesting specimen. That's an adult mammoth molar that was found right outside of Plover just a few years ago. We're actually hoping to get the rest of this mammoth. He's still in the ground. At the moment, the landowner is not very agreeable to us collecting this particular individual. But based on geologic maps of where this was found, he's at the bottom of the Arnett Moraine. The bottom of the Arnett Moraine is about 13,000 or 14,000 years old. So this guy has been under there for at least 13,000 or 14,000 years. I figure there's no real rush. We'll get to him eventually. And then these 2 small pieces on the lower right, a guy brought those in to me, a farmer brought those in to me a year or 2 ago, and he said, I collect scrap iron, and I picked these up because I thought they were iron, but he said, now I'm thinking that these maybe aren't scrap iron. And what those are, those actually the little tiny processes from the back of a mammoth skull. And so these were picked up in Portage County. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember where in Portage County he had picked them up. And then under the large tooth, you'll actually see a little tiny baby mammoth tooth, which I brought along for you guys to have a look at tonight. Now we get to these ceramics. So these ceramics are actually, these types of ceramics are fairly well known, and they come from what's called the shaft tomb culture in western Mexico. They date to about 1,500 to 2,200 years ago. And at that time, people in Central America and Mexico were actually building these vertical shaft tombs and interring their dead in them, and also interring these incredible ceramics in them. And in the late 1970s, a woman drove up to the museum and opened up her trunk, and Ed Marks went out, and she said, well, here's the deal. These were my parents. I don't know anything about them. and I'm on my way to the dump, but if you want them, you can have them. So Ed took them, not knowing at all what they were, but knowing that they were these fabulous ceramics. I've done a little research on them. I actually remember seeing these in the early 1970s when I came to school here. They were on display outside of the archaeology department at that point. They disappeared for years and years. They were in a vault in the art department. They disappeared once again, and we found them about 3 or 4 years ago in the basement of the science building. So these are these fabulous human figures and ceramic vessels. The sad part is they're almost certainly looted from burials in western Mexico. I actually contacted the country of Mexico about 5 years ago, and they said basically all those tombs have been looted. They were mostly looted in the 20s and 30s. There's millions of these all over the world. We don't want them back, so we still have them at the museum. One of the larger things we found in the freezer was a 10-foot tiger hide. This is another thing. I have no idea where it came from or how old it is, but it's massive. It is truly a huge tiger hide. We use it for the collection crawl. Kids love to see it. But it's really the kind of thing, it's sort of fragile. We can't really put it on display every day. It's probably been treated with horrendous chemicals. And it was really pretty dirty when I found it. It's a short, humorous story. So I rolled it up and put it in the back of my truck, and I drove out to Amherst on a nice day, and I unrolled it in the car wash and blasted all the dirt off of it. And it wasn't long before there was an entire crowd of people around the car wash trying to figure out what I was doing with this tiger hide. But it cleaned up very nicely. A few more odd items that were in the vault. One of them is this human skull. This skull, lots of anatomical specimens, human skeletons were collected by universities years and years ago. And it's difficult to tell if there's no paperwork with them where they came from. Actually, a lot of them came from rural India. There was a whole trade in India of people collecting human skeletons along the Ganges and shipping them to Europe and North America. And in fact, there's a lot to indicate they were actually bombing people on the head, boiling the skeletons down and shipping them over to universities. But this guy is most likely Native American. And I say that because of the shape of the skull and because of the incredible wear on his teeth. His teeth are worn right down through the enamel, and that's classic Native American prehistoric diet where there was a lot of grit in the diet. Also, the teeth are what are called shovel-shaped incisors. The incisors have a very curved inner surface on them. And this guy apparently died from a whack to the back of the head there, and somebody filled it in with plaster a long time ago and then varnished the entire skull. So we don't have much information about this except that it showed up in a box with a stuffed pheasant. The other two items are actually from Papua New Guinea. The one on the bottom, and I brought it along for you to take a look at tonight, that's the prow of a canoe. So somebody really liked that crocodile carving, and they sawed the end off somebody's canoe in New Guinea and brought it back. And on the top, I don't really know if they realized it or not, but the figure on the top is a mortuary figure. And in Indonesia and parts of North Australia, they actually bury people in hollow log coffins above the ground. So they actually let the flesh rot away, they take all the bones, they put them in a hollow log, and they paint and carve the exterior of the log. And that carving is from the top of a hollow log coffin. Again, how it got to UWSP is a mystery to me. But you can come up and take a look at it tonight if you'd like.
How would you date that one out, that top left one up there?
Pardon me?
Date-wise.
That would be pretty difficult to date, but I would, they haven't used hollow log coffins at least since probably the early 60s. So it's at least that old, and I would expect it's much older than that, probably 20s or 30s. So, I mean, it could have been something that came back with a GI in World War II. This is an interesting specimen. This thing is huge. This is a giant land tortoise skull. And I talked to our current herpetologist, Pete Zaney, and he was quite sure that this had come from the Galapagos